Doing just User here again, Cricket Strength, bringing you a special question and answer with Alex Gidman. Giddo, thanks very much for joining us.
No problem.
Great stuff. How you going?
Yeah, very well. Thanks yourself.
Yeah, all good, all good. Okay, so we'll crack straight into it. Most of you probably know Giddo. If you don't, Giddo, tell us a little bit about yourself and your sort of history in cricket.
Okay, so yeah, Alex Gidman. Had a 15-year career in professional cricket, predominantly at Gloucestershire. I spent 14 years at Gloucestershire. Started in 2002 through to 2014, 15, and I moved to Worcestershire for a year. Was very lucky. Had some really good years, some challenging years. Was part of 5 trophy-winning teams, which is pretty cool. 2 Lords finals with Gloucestershire, a couple of other league titles, and then I was overseas player for Otago down in New Zealand, where we was part of the team that won the first trophy in the history of their club, which was really special. Great experience to go and play down there for a few months, and then was in leadership for quite a while with Gloucestershire, sort of 6 or 7 years as captain and vice captain. And then moved to Worcestershire for a year, and then sadly had to retire through injury about 18 months, about 2 years ago now, to be honest. And been entering the real world, the big bad world since. It's been a challenging time, but I wouldn't have changed anything for the world. Really lucky with my cricketing career, learned a huge amount and met some wonderful people.
Let's make it clear as well, the injury was a finger, not anything else.
No, certainly nothing to do with. It was a complete freak injury, which has left me with a very, very bent finger. There you go. Check that out.
Yeah, the banana. Be an umpire with that, man. So anyway, how did you first get into cricket then?
First gone to cricket, just the usual stuff. Well, usual for back in those days. I think it's changed a lot, but I was very much in the garden. I've got a younger brother who's also had a professional career. We used to play in the garden together. Go down the local clubs, the parks, and I guess it was quite an old school introduction to the sport. That very much just enjoyment first, go and play, have a bit of fun. I think I was lucky having a brother that I had someone I could go and play with. We both love cricket, obviously. We both love sport, full stop. We played a lot of other sports as well, but cricket really came into its own at sort of the age of sort of 14, 15, maybe later, when I wanted to take it a bit more seriously, but predominantly just that kind of younger, just playful attitude towards sport in general, and cricket with my brother Wills.
How did you first get into Gloucester then? Was there any other counties sniffing around?
Well, it's an interesting story, I suppose. I wasn't great when I was a young player. Through my teenage years, I enjoyed it, but I wasn't a great cricketer. In terms of the county stuff, I did all the county youth stuff, got left out of, I think it's under 15s, got left out. And then when I left school, I was told by a couple of people who were very influential at that stage that I wasn't good enough to be a professional cricketer, which was a bit of a kick in the teeth, a bit of an early setback. But I decided to roll my sleeves up, and I was lucky enough to go onto the MCC Young Cricketers up at Lords, which for those of you that don't know is kind of like an academy system for young players who perhaps aren't quite good enough at that stage to get a go. So I went up there, and it was kind of like my university in the sense that I learned a lot about life, learned a lot about people, and an attitude towards success. It was very much kind of everything's there for you. You just got to make the most of it. So I trained really hard, played a lot of cricket. And then I had a little bit of interest from Derby in my second year there. And then, well, because of that interest, things had changed back at Gloucestershire. A new coach came in, a new kind of approach, and thankfully he turned around and said, look, you're one of our lads, we want to give you a go. So that was it. So after a couple of years away in the big smoke in London, I came back and was fortunate enough to get my first professional contract.
What year was it? Was that around 99, 2000?
No, 2001. I made my debut. The end of that summer, I made my debut, and I started professionally in 2002.
Okay. So that
around that time, the White Steves was 99. So I left school, and then the Young Cricketers was 99. Yeah.
Yeah. because around that time, that was when I started off at Somerset, and I absolutely hated Gloucester then because you were winning so many one-day comps and were just such a niggly, horrible little side to play against. But what was it like to go into that environment with? Because some big characters, weren't there?
Yeah, big characters. I mean, firstly, really, obviously, very lucky to go into that environment. I think to go into a winning team, to go into a winning culture, was obviously something very fortunate. But I think a couple of things stood out. I mean, the clarity was one, clarity in roles. Each individual knew exactly what they needed to do, what was expected of them, what their role was, which was really, really important. So the knock-on effect of clarity meant that they knew how to practice, they knew areas they wanted to improve, but they knew how to perform, and they knew what was expected of them, like I mentioned. And if they didn't, then they knew the consequences of that, which wasn't necessarily automatic being dropped or anything like that, but they knew they had to perform to a certain standard. But so the clarity really, really stood out. And then I think also just the attitude towards the games, the approach, that kind of togetherness of understanding, what they were trying to do as a group, what they were trying to achieve, and how they were trying to play the game. It was very simple, but I do think that underlying message that I got was clarity in what they were trying to do, both as individuals and as a collective.
So was there any difference between how they approached the white and red ball? Because I remember around that time, the white ball was successful, red ball not so much. And what was the sort of
well,
process?
I think John Bracewell was very open about this. He was brought in to bring success, and he felt at that time, after a year or two in the job, that the best chance of success with the players that we had at that particular time was in one-day cricket. I think that in cricket in general, it's extremely hard to do really well in all formats consistently. I think naturally you get a tendency to one or two, or one format of the game more than the other. I mean, back then, as you mentioned, it was very much sort of 50 over, and then Championship. 2020 wasn't around then, so there was a tendency to be better at one. I think that's very natural, and John felt that with the current players that we had, that suited our style more, and it was based around all-rounders really. So Jack Russell, obviously, the way he sort of reinvented wicket keeping by standing up to stumps. We had bowlers that bowled very accurately, but they weren't particularly quick, and we built pressure. And I think that the difference between white ball and red ball cricket was that the white ball cricket, the pressure built up quicker, and the opposition had to react. Whereas I think in red ball cricket they could counter that pressure for longer periods of time. I mean, our players were still equally as skillful, but because the opposition could play tactically a different game, obviously over 4 days as opposed to one day, they outdid us, and perhaps our guys, we lacked a little bit maybe in terms of skill in some areas. I mentioned we were equally skilled. I mean, what I mean by that is that Jack Russell could still compete against the red ball as opposed to the white ball. Yeah. But perhaps we lacked a little bit of pace, maybe, for example, in a bowler, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what and a lot of teams always felt we got in the red ball, was that with the white ball they could get on you and they'd ring the field up and bowl straight and different speeds, but then they struggled to blast you out with the red ball. And then obviously you had Louis, who had a little bit of nip, but other than that, around that time there wasn't a lot more, was there?
Yeah, no, they weren't, and I think that that's what we lacked. I mean, Mike Smith was an exceptional bowler, extremely skillful. Played a Test match for England. You don't get to that level if you're not extremely skillful. But we probably lacked a little bit of depth as well. Louis and Mike Smith were very, very great bowlers, but they weren't backed up with the same kind of intensity and skill level for red ball cricket. Someone like Mark Lane, for example, was an extremely skillful bowler, but again he struggled to, and it wasn't him. It's just the nature of the game. his style of bowling wasn't as effective in red ball cricket
Yeah.
over as opposed to white ball cricket in such a
Half as
condensed
well.
form.
The Elaine and Harv in the middle there was so hard to get away when they're one day cricket, and then
Yeah,
obviously
exactly. Yeah.
not quite as effective in red ball because you got 4 days. You can just bat them away for a little bit. So
You've
that
obviously
sort
got.
of team came. Sorry, yeah?
I was just going to say, I was going to add to what you said. You've got different fields, haven't you? I mean, we in white ball cricket, you don't have slip fielders in the middle overs, for example. So you've got more guys in front of the bat, creating that pressure, creating that hub and intensity. Whereas, as we know in red ball cricket, different tactics, as you've mentioned, over 4 days means that we weren't quite as effective in still bowling the same balls, but because of things like fielding positions and the situation of the game and conditions, that those balls weren't as effective as they were with the white ball.
Yeah, yeah. So that sort of team was almost coming to an end there. What was it like? It was almost a transition period then, and as you sort of came into captaincy as well. What was it like, sort of being a leader in that transition period?
Um, it was very challenging, to be totally honest. I mean, we struggled. Obviously, we've still struggled since. Or I say Gloucestershire struggled since that period, really, for massive success. I know the lads won a trophy a couple of years ago, but I think in terms of finding their identity as a club again, probably haven't quite managed to do that since that era. I think we obviously lost a big group of players at the same time. I think if you're losing, roughly sort of 4 or 5 major players all within a year or two of each other, that leaves some big holes, which I don't think we've quite filled, or we didn't fill with perhaps the right players. But also there was some external pressures as well. The club decided to go down a different route, and in terms of looking at developing the ground, which although it's only just happened, that whole process started a long time ago. So things like budgets and financial pressures came on, which meant we were limited to what we could do in terms of recruitment, looking at facilities, things like that. So coaching staff, all those kinds of things came into that kind of interplay. So it was challenging, very challenging, and we probably in hindsight didn't quite get it right. Exactly what we didn't quite get right, I'm not totally sure, but obviously we didn't, because we weren't as successful as we should have been, really. After that period, we didn't build on that period as well as we should have.
Hmm. It's going to be hard though. So as a leader, what were your sort of main things you thought? Right, I need to get this across to the boys in my capacity as captain. How would you say your philosophy was as a captain?
Oh gosh, good question. I think it changed and I think it evolved, but I think that one thing I was always uh, very, I guess, clear on from my own point of view was taking responsibility for decisions. It was my role. You got to make tough decisions. You got to be prepared to make the tough decisions, and you got to be able to communicate with the team about those decisions. You mean, and what I mean by that is things like if you have to leave someone out, for example, you've got to have the courage to go and be open and honest with that player as to why you've made those tough decisions, and that was very much the leader's responsibility. I was very keen to encourage thought and openness and knowledge sharing within the group. I think a leader has to be open. They cannot just it can't be it's my way or the highway in all aspects of what they do. You've got to be open to other players' thoughts and ideas and embrace that. I think because quite often players can have some very good thoughts and tactical thoughts and plans themselves. So you've got to embrace that and encourage that. Because you want your team to be relaxed and feel like they're being part of the longer process. So I think kind of it off the pitch it's kind of based around that. I think on the pitch very much an instinctive role. I think you've got to trust yourself. You've got to draw on your own experiences to trust your own decisions on the pitch. as well as embracing other thoughts and ideas, as you go as well. I think learning from mistakes is absolutely crucial as well. I knew full well I would never get everything right, and I'm far from it. I've got a lot of stuff wrong, but got to be prepared to learn from those and accept them, not just brush them under the carpet and kind of pretend it didn't happen. I think you've got to be open and honest with yourself as well as the others in terms of that, that decision making, responsibility, that kind of field, I suppose, is where I felt was probably really, really important from a leadership point of view.
Yeah, you've made one decision which I thought was very good in 2010 when you didn't follow us on down at Cheltenham.
Yeah.
That was about it.
That one didn't work, did it? Funny enough, the next time we were in that position against another team, I remember I talked about learning from losing. I used that experience and that match actually to make sure I didn't make that mistake again at the same ground. I think it was the year later. We were in a similar position. I made a different decision, and this time it paid off. Yeah, that wasn't my best. But you live and learn.
Yeah, we had Sakib who bowled really well, and you had a few batters who played a few loose shots, should we say?
Yeah, I think we panicked. I mean, if I remember correctly, we kind of panicked and we didn't know how to construct that chase. We didn't know what we were doing. Whether
you still set us 360 or 370 on the last day, and that's not easy. But luckily, Mo had one of his days. It was still quite young then. Him and Mitch put on a massive partnership, didn't they?
Yeah, but I think in terms of building that, our third innings, we just didn't know how to construct that third innings. We never took time out of the game. We never just sort of took the sting out of the certain periods of the game which we needed to. We just kept we kept going. We felt the pressure, and we just kept making bad decisions. I think that those are the sorts of things that as teams you're going to go through, as young players you're going to go through. But you've got to. It's a great example of having to learn from those and sitting back and discussing, what happened, why it might have happened, and then when we're in this situation again, what we're going to do differently. Because I think that in all sport, and definitely cricket, but in all sports, you are constantly in these positions again. You don't have one-offs in sport, very rarely. So you've got to be prepared to, I think to learn from those, but be very, very open about it. If you end up hiding from stuff or brushing under the carpet, sadly, you end up just making the same mistake again.
Yeah, no, it's one of those occasions though, when you're in the middle of it, you know what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's like, we know exactly what's happening here, and it just sort of happens. In cricket, it's just like, oh, we're going to be all out here. Even if you're 3 or 4 down, no, we're all out. And it's like knowing it and say, right, stop, let's just chill for a little bit and refocus and let's get back on it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's knowing how to try and handle those situations as a team as well, Things like messages going out or calling for drinks or just something, or whether you change the way you run between the wickets in cricket specifically, or you spend a bit more time in between overs chatting just to change the momentum and to stop the opposition from dictating terms. In that particular instance, it might have been making Shakib stand for longer before his overs. It's just to try and break up the rhythm and the tempo that you guys were playing at that particular moment in time. But again, those are sort of things that I think if you're open and honest enough to learn from them, you hopefully can make some adjustments next time you're in those situations. Because like you say, it happens all the time, and we used to do it back in the dirty green seamers of Bristol. You could see it happening all the time. You get a couple of wickets, the ball swinging, what's coming. But it was amazing how many teams kept making the same mistakes year after year, and coming with very little changes of tactical plans. Before the game, you could almost, as you say, you could sense it was going to happen, and most of the time it did.
Yeah. Certainly did, especially the green one put in. You feel the groans around the dressing room. Oh, here we go. And then you see Louis running one end, swinging it, and you might have Jamal for a couple of years at the other end, and you're just like, well, here we go. Not much fun.
Yeah,
Not much
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
So, mate, you're obviously retired now. Tell us about what you're up to now. I know you're into some leadership work, aren't you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. So I think obviously the injury happened, and I, forced out the game. I had a year left, so I suppose that um, everything that I kind of was starting to think about and planning, got brought forward. So I spent a bit of time, just trying to figure out, what it was that I was interested in doing, and I think that's still kind of happening even now. Although it's been 18 months, I still go through periods of time where I'm kind of trying to figure out, what the future might look like. But a lot of the stuff that I've done has come from my blog that I write, which was pretty popular, and really looked at some of the I guess the tougher times in my last 18 months. But again, I've learned a huge amount from that process, and I've started to do quite a lot of sport to business kind of workshops, leadership stuff, leadership development programs and things. But it's really sort of getting under the skin of the aspects that actually make a difference, as opposed to the kind of fluffy stuff around the edges, which we can all talk about. It's really trying to actually make some differences, make some changes. So that's been really, really exciting for me. I really enjoy that. I'm doing a bit of studying as we speak as well. I've done some NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programs, which is quite technical stuff, but I found that really interesting. So I did a kind of like a 6-month course in that, and I'm currently doing some psychology out of online out of Derby University as well. So sort of linking the real life experiences of cricket and then some kind of, I guess, a bit of learning behind it, just to I guess just to add a bit of meat on the bone, because I do a little bit of coaching as well for the MCC Young Cricketers, ironically, where I started. It's really interesting linking the two. So I'm really interested in this kind of one-to-one relationship stuff. So they're kind of like the performance coach. It's something that I find something that I'm really interested in, and feel like I can have an impact, whether that's sport or business, which I'm involved in both.
Sweet. So all looking good, mate.
Well, yeah, it's going in the right direction. I mean, the real world is very, very different to cricket. Things happen in a very different way. It's a lot slower. It's a lot harder. The relationships, you get let down a lot. People say a lot of stuff that they don't mean. I've probably done that as well. Not on purpose, but I think you get a lot of promises made which are not fulfilled, which is quite challenging. So I think you need to draw on a lot of the stuff I probably did in cricket subconsciously. Resilience and persistence. I guess you kind of got those characteristics from cricket, and I think it's really important to perhaps recognise those when you finish playing cricket, and have those in abundance really when you finish, because I think my view is that sport is getting harder and harder in terms of preparing people for life after sport, and I think it's only going to get tougher. So it's really drawing on all those experiences to give yourself a fighting chance of being successful, once we finish.
Great stuff. Great stuff, mate. We'll leave it there. I've already taken up far too much of your time, but just a massive thank you for joining us. And I've got to say, guys, when he joined us, I was a bit worried because I didn't really know him, and I was like, oh, kiddo, he looks so miserable all the time. He's going to be hard work. One of the nicest blokes in the game, really was, and all the players and the staff at Worcester were absolutely gutted about his finger injury, because it was great, awesome to have on board. So, mate, thank you so much, and all the best in the future.
Hey, no worries. Thanks, Ross. Cheers, bud.